Right, good evening. Well, it's been a long day. Good afternoon. So we're back for the final block of the national conference. And so this block will be about, actual case studies of standards and practice. And we're getting examples from Quebec, from Canada, and from France. So very happy to have these actual, tangible, you can actually touch them. Donc aussi, cet après-midi, on va beaucoup, cette session-ci va beaucoup focaliser sur la mise en application des normes.
This session will be focused on norms applied, the ones that we talked about during the day.
Equipment for the simultaneous translation, there is a table at the back. So the first session is about using methods of data delivery for facility management, Canadian case studies, with Claudia Cozzitorto, Director of Design Technologies, and Victor Lima, BIM Manager at Diamond Schmidt Architects.
Hello, it's working? Yeah, okay, I can hear myself. Okay, great. So we're going to talk about data delivery for facility management, and we're going to do this through three case studies that we have currently underway at Diamond Schmidt. So Diamond Schmidt Architects is a 300-person studio in Canada. Our head office is located in Toronto, and we partner with many architects and engineers across the country. We have a broad portfolio, so you can see that our portfolio ranges from residential, government work, institutional work, transit work, so we have many typologies. They range in scale and budget, as well as project delivery type. So in order to support this wide range, this big portfolio of projects, we have many different workflows, many different processes and tools to support what the project needs, as well as what our clients are requesting. So Victor and I are going to share our methods of data delivery through these three case studies. So the first one is Burnaby Hospital, Phase 1. It's located in British Columbia, Burnaby, British Columbia. It's a P3 project, and it's a new build construction. It's a 6-story, 83-bed community hospital. It includes a maternity ward, NICU, some outbreak zones for infectious disease, as well as a new inpatient mental health unit. The second case study is McGill New Vic. It's actually located here in Montreal, very close to where we are today. We're partnered with LeMay Michaud to deliver this project. It's a heritage revitalization and new construction project. It's a very large project. The Royal Victoria Hospital is being transformed into the world's leading centers for teaching, research, and innovation in sustainable systems and public policy. And last, we have Adasoke, which is located in our nation's capital in Ottawa, Ontario. It's for the City of Ottawa. It's a new build, and it will house the Ottawa Public Library and the Library and Archives of Canada. It has many programs, including town hall, gathering spaces, collaboration spaces, Indigenous community spaces, and so forth. So what we thought to do, instead of talking about all three case studies in isolation, we thought we would share these case studies against the ISO 19650 framework. So none of the projects were actually intended or intentionally following the framework, so this is more of a kind of reflection and a comparison using the ISO 19650 as a baseline. So we found that we need to, if we're talking about data delivery, we need to actually begin in procurement. So how do the data delivery requirements begin, and how are they formulated? So according to ISO 19650, we see that a bunch of tender information is sent to the consultant team for bidding on the project. In reality, we found that that tender information varied dramatically as far as what was to be delivered at that phase. So once a project, once there's a tender at DSA, either Victor or I brought in to help the project, develop the project team, develop the pre-BIM execution plan, the team qualifications, the delivery plan, and then of course the tender response. So again, the amount of information and the tender information varies, and only one of the case studies that we're showcasing today actually allowed for us to deliver a pre-BEP as part of the tender response. So once the project is awarded, we get confirmation that we've won the award, everyone's happy, and we begin to sign the contracts and so forth. We actually found that in 2 of the case studies that's when quite a few data delivery requirements would come out. That's when we would find out about some new requirements, and so that would sometimes delay the post-BEP. So we would, of course, move on to the developing the BIM execution plan that reflects the requirements by having a kickoff meeting. So again, we have the requirements from the clients. We develop a BIM execution plan that reflects those specifically, and they include things like, of course, the model element table, which is very important. It's a collaboration with all of the consultants, as well as the information level of information and all the assets that need to be managed and delivered at the end of the project. Who's going to be delivering what information? And then another very important piece, there's lots of components to the BIM execution plan, we're just highlighting a few of them, is the model organization. So we have data coming from a lot of different models, a lot of drawings coming from a lot of different models. So, for example, McGill's, that project has dozens upon dozens of models. And we have data coming from a lot of different places. So of course we have to map that out. We have to keep track of it, who's delivering what. We also map out which models are live linked, which models are going to be exchanged on a kind of periodic basis, and how is everything going to get connected, and as well as the common data environment. So we often hear about common data environments being singular. We see that actually there are quite a few. We have to manage what information is in what buckets and how that all works together. Again, to just make sure that we're tracking and understanding where all the information, the data for the projects is going to live and who's going to be participating and populating them. All right, so I'll pass it over to Victor.
Awesome. So if we start getting to the production phase itself, so what's going to happen is the first thing is we're going to have to understand all the data that the client gave it to us. So a lot of times we get into the reference information, so what did they give us, like what are the formats, what are the files. Sometimes they will give us in different ways that we're going to have to understand how to deal with it at this point. But we also, at the end, we're going to have to understand how we are delivering that data to the client. So if we start getting to the different ways that we receive data, so far we have images, we have PDFs, we have drawings, we have Excel files, we have different ways that a lot of times we can't really capture everything in one location. So the way we have and the way DSA uses for the drawing production is we get into Revit, but then Revit and all those different file formats, they don't really talk to each other really well. So what is the way that we can actually transfer this data, bring it into a different way that can be used or accessible in Revit, so to understand that we are following the client requirements? So if we get into that part, in DSA we actually leverage Rofus. So Rofus, it's a platform that we use as our common data for all the rooms information, equipment, and furniture, and all those elements that the owner gave it to us. And sometimes as they give us to us in Excel, that actually it's very helpful, so we can easily import. But when you get into PDFs or just images, it becomes a little tricky because we don't really actually have an automation process to bring those in the software. So it does adds up quite a bit of time when we are not to develop on the data that we received at that point. But once the data is in Rofus for access, we can actually start defining how data is going to be coming to and from Rofus to any of the softwares that we use. So at this point, we are leveraging for getting area from Rofus, understanding that we actually have the families that are required on the rooms itself from the client to be. We also get into finishes, the schedules, doors, and so forth. So on that end, we actually full access to the Revit properties, so we can start linking and make sure that we are following the requirements. And that it's mostly when you get into the family. So Rofus actually get into understanding which families you have in Revit to which families you have in your rooms. So you actually make sure those are correlated to what the client requires. And sometimes it's not only like data as data per se, but we also have the design data. As architects, we do have designs or ideas that are really hard to be transferred over from 3D into 2D. So understanding different softwares that we have out there that we can leverage that translation from the 3D world into the 2D for deliveries is a bit tricky because as we leverage a software that is not really 100% for modeling, so we go to other ways and start leveraging open aspects of like Rhino, bringing IFC models from ArchiCAD, and just federating all that information so we can get our drawings out of that. And sometimes the drawings are not even into the Revit per se. We actually can start getting into from Rhino, SketchUp, and some other different alternatives to comply. But once we have all this data into the project, one of the main things is like understanding that the data is going to be usable to the client at the end of the day. We can do a lot of our data, as Claudia mentioned. We do specify which parameters or which information the client is looking for, but a lot of times the design team, it's not 100% on top of that information. So we do need to make sure that the family that we are using have the correct information that the client is looking for. So we develop like multiple dashboards that actually leverages data extraction from Revit using like Dynamo, Clarity, and some other automation tools to actually create and give us a visual of how complete our data is and how are we actually following the requirements in that sense. So we can use this information, provide the design team with that and say, okay, so let's start focusing on these items to make sure we are following the requirements. And as more and more we are getting into the clash detections during the design phase, it's just a good way of understanding how our geometry itself it's providing a better information for the construction team once we issue our models for the construction. So a lot of times when we get into the more developed facility management projects, they actually require us to be completely working with the CMs during the design and transferring over during construction. So we minimize as much as possible the loss of data that is going to be happening during that phase. So getting the CM actually involved during the design phase is actually very helpful because it just get them a better understanding of how the models are structured and how you're going to be getting your data for continuing over. But when we all get all the elements together, we have to understand how we're going to be delivering, and that a lot of times is actually going to be coming from the client side requesting their files. And a lot of times clients are pretty much just asking for all the files that we have out there because they're still like trying to understand what they're going to be using for. Sometimes they're just in the process of starting their facility management part, and they want to make sure that they have the information they would need down the road. But one of the main things is just understanding all the processes that requires for the translations between the native software into the submission files. And once we actually provided the files to the clients, they were actually going to be checking our elements to make sure we are following their requirements. So a lot of times, those checks are going to be happening at each model submission. So we have 30, 40, 60, 100% DD, CDs, up to IFC. And during that process, the client actually going to be looking at the models, extracting the data, making sure how usable the data is, and providing us with feedback whether that information is following what they're expecting, what are the areas that we need to improve, or make sure we follow what is shown on the documentation that they provided to us. And a lot of times it's just like, as I mentioned, like the design to the construction, most of the information happens during the design phase, but we also have information that is required from the construction phase that the client is looking for. And defining that workflow, or how we actually going to be providing the client that data, it's a very important area, because a lot of times our typical workflow is the design team has the design model, the construction team has the construction model, but then how those data are actually going to be connecting to each other. And at this point, we're pretty much, there are different ways that are being done, and Rofus is one of them. So the CM is actually getting access to the Rofus. Once the installation is happening, they're actually going to be adding all the information into the asset parameter within the Rofus and providing that data at the end of the day to the client. But we also have times where the client actually give the CM access to their management system, and they pretty much extract the design data out of the design model, and the construction team is just going to be adding that information natively in the facility management software. And at the end of the day, we always going to have the project closeout, which is when we get into the handover of the data itself. And that actually is going to be different file types. Some clients are going to be asking you to deliver in Kobe. Some clients are going to be asking you to actually just provide you the model itself. Sometimes it's going to be actual Rofus as they use their platform itself. But at this point, we haven't seen a lot on the openBIM aspects when it gets into the facility management from the client side for their own use. We don't have a common data environment in that sense from the client. And I think that's the part that makes it a little trickier when we are transferring over the information to the client. So I'll pass it over to Claudia again.
Excellent. So we just thought we would offer some summaries. So alignment's still required with the procurement phase. We find that that's an area in our case studies, but also in other projects where we're seeing that there's a lot of discrepancy with the framework outlined in the ISO 19650. We're also seeing that although our post-BEP is something that we always do, regardless of any requirements and requests from the client, that there's still a kind of a disconnect between the contracts and the BIM execution plan, the post-BEP, both in when they're signed and who's signing them and writing them. So that's an area that we do kind of commonly see, again, beyond the case studies that were shown here. That's another kind of takeaway we've noticed. The level of development, we're still having a lot of conversations around, what does the level of development mean, misunderstandings about what people were expecting, within the design team, within the construction team, within the client handover. So right now we're actually in the process of looking into and implementing level of information need and exploring how that could help with these conversations. Again, a theme that's beyond these particular case studies, but something that we're seeing. And then, I guess in conclusion, what we've noticed is that, we started at the beginning with the clients asking for, specific requirements. They also are varying in specificity for us to respond to, but that Essentially, every project that we seem to have is a bespoke solution to the information requirements, maybe somewhere ISO 19650 and some open standards being more implemented more broadly in Canada can help. You know, today just we're in one architecture firm in Canada. We have about 140 active projects, and it feels like we have 140 solutions to deliver those projects, and I'm sure others probably feel the same. So with that, I think we'll thank you, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Victor. That was great. Very good, actually. Overlap of the process. ISO 19650 is a useful framework to explain what's going on, but you know, perhaps still some work to do. Our next presenter will be coming to talk about ISO 19650. We have a ISO 19650, but from an organizational perspective. Lieu Dao is from Pomerleau. She's the innovation manager at the R&D and special projects.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here today to tell you about our journey for implementing ISO 19650. I might get a little excited, so you will have to lower the volume because I get loud when I'm passionate and I talk too much. Just on a side note, we work in an office before the pandemic and the lockdown, so they had to put like a glass wall. They had to add a glass wall in an open space where I work because I'm too loud with one of my other colleagues. So bear with me with the loudness. So besides being loud, I love construction, and I have over 12 years of experience in the industry, construction and BIM application, and I'm almost like 8 years with Pomerleau. I also oversee the digital transformation team, the work that we're doing at Pomerleau, and I also teach 2 classes, graduate classes at Études. So this is just for you to know me a little bit, to know who is talking to you now. Today I will just go over a little bit about who Pomerleau is for our international folks here, and I will jump right into the ISO 19650 and our journey, and then also a little bit of our insights on the approach for implementing the ISO 19650 standard. A little bit about Pomerleau. We have nearly 60 years of history, and throughout the year you can see you can probably see the progress in construction. Like we can start with like black and white pictures, very, very traditional, and then now we are in 2022. We're talking about sustainable development, and then also integrating a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation, and also BIM in 2012. We have 9 offices throughout Canada, and also around 200 active projects across Canada, coast to coast, and we also work with local suppliers and partners with our projects. A little bit of expertise at Pomerleau. We have the building division and also the civil and infrastructure division, and also in different areas of buildings, institutional processes, maritime projects. A little bit on different expertise and some of my colleagues here can tell you more about it if you passed at the booth. Now, a little bit of context before I jump into ISO 19650 is that I will tell you about the introduction of BIM and when we started. We started in 2012. So it's been around 10 years that we've been doing BIM. However, it wasn't easy, and we also had to start by understanding modeling and what had to be included in the modeling in 2012 and 13 and 14. And we keep innovating, improving on the use of information. So we added more BIM uses. I'm not going to go through all the different BIM uses, but as long as we go, we progresses. There are progresses, and we added more BIM use on the job site. So this is all applicable on some of our job sites. And then later on, we also started to use more information, integrated scheduling. You all know what 4D simulations are. The first one would be back in 2014 and 15 with our project in Quebec City, and then lately we also used the 4D simulations. But on top of that, we added explaining different methods to deconstruct. So this is an example of deconstruction. We needed models, we needed information to plan the deconstruction, but also to plan for sustainable development, and then to be able to en anglais, conserver, c'est quoi?
In English, what
preserve,
is
yeah.
Conserve.
So preserve some pieces of the bridge for R&D, and then for other partners that would need to keep it, and then also to preserve it as an art of work a little bit everywhere throughout the country. And then while we've been adding all these uses for our projects, we also added different functions, different functionalities, the use of the 3D models for specific needs on specific projects. So we did automation for to check the conformity, the compliance with the client requirements. Of course, 5D quantity extraction, and also transfer the information to the operations. So all of these different uses, we did it specific on projects, but it wasn't very integrated, because it was per project, and then some of the project would have all of the uses, some of the other project would just have 1 or 2 use. So we did progress throughout all the life cycle of the project, using different types of information throughout different phases. And the most important throughout that is the information management. So to be able to take all the information from different partners, from our partners in architecture, our partners in engineering, it needs to have interoperability. I hope you understood it in English. Interoperability. So with this BIM approach, we don't work alone. We work also with our partners, as I said, our engineers, our trades also, and then the architects. And what happened is that we also work a little bit with our data, and then the sharing of data was very limited. And the main goal is to be able to work on the same source of information. So that's why we started to get inspired and use the ISO 19650, because it's just very logical for the BIM approach to make sure that you understand what is required to be able to produce the information when it's required, and then who is going to use it. So we want to make sure that the information that is in production, all the data is used and useful, and our other colleagues later in the life cycle will be able to use it. That's when I jump into ISO 19650, and yes, this is only one slide explaining ISO 19650, because Claudia and Victor went through all the different steps, so I'm not going into too much detail about this, but I always tell my students that you have to be able to summarize, and on a one-pager, it can explain how you can understand it very well. So my colleague Romain did it very well on a one-pager, explaining the whole ISO 19650 standard here. So first, what is really important is assessment and need. We want to know what we need to produce. We want to know what has to be produced and when, and for what use. And then again, with all the different different steps, all of this we condensed it into 15 typical resources and products at Parmelo to be able to work and use the standard. So we have documents, we have Excel sheets, and then we also have processes. And then on top of that, we have the CD workflow, and then also a platform. It's not only one platform, it's like different platform as our colleague mentioned earlier. And then there's also the part where there's not cybersecurity, it's information security, and then also information quality. All of that is the ISO 19650 very high level explaining to you what it is. Now, it can be like for us in our as a builder, it can be applicable for any contracts for all the stakeholders in the project, whether at what phase you're working on. So why we implemented 19650 at Parmelo is because some of our projects, as you can see, requires it at one point, not specifically, but it's an approach that we thought was very useful. And then it was also a matter for us to be able to repeat the efficiency in our projects, because as I mentioned before, we did have different BIM uses for different projects, specific needs, but then it's not very equal everywhere on all of our projects that has BIM. We also wanted to make sure that we have a better quality of information, and then streamline also the information exchange. And also to simplify the information production and to have a common language throughout the project and throughout our partners. And it also matches our commitment to drive the industry forward, and we want to continue to innovate and improve on our processes. So I want to finish on the insights that we have during the journey when we implemented the ISO. So we didn't start from scratch. As you can see, we started since 2012 working with the BIM approach, working with different processes, with BIM uses. We did learn a lot. Not all of our projects were extremely successful. So we start with experience and also lessons learned. We also started with a lot of documentations as well. I will tell you a little bit more about it. But it also starts with commitment from higher management. At Parmelo, we have 5 core values, and one of the values is innovation. And then we also have a dedicated team for innovation that I'm part of. And then when I introduced the ISO 19650 standard to my VP, he asked me, how come we're not certified already? So he's all on board with this, and then we started training. So training our employees was very important so that they can understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. So we first started with our innovation team. All our VDC coordinators and everyone who is in the innovation operations. And then we also trained our colleagues in innovation, but mostly in R&D, so they can understand also what it is and how it's applied. And then we also training our operational team. So the proposals team to understand what the ISO 19650 is, and then also in pre-construction where we have more design and build or P3 projects that they will also understand what it is. And of course, our people on site, building and civil business units. We also, it's a big teamwork in our ISO implementation. We have a dedicated internal team at Parmelo who is dedicated to work with the ISO standard and to make sure that is understandable by everyone. And then we also have some colleagues and partners, architects, engineers that are very open to work with us and to learn along the way with us. And of course, we have our external partners for auditing and then also for training. And then here's the documentation. We had to create, even though we had a lot of documentation for our projects, we wanted to create a standard resource to make sure that every project will have the same base, even though they can apply it or tweak it to the project need. And so we provide templates, and then in the Microsoft version or on a software like Plannerly. So we have different, 15 different ones. And then finally, for auditing. Auditing was interesting, it was super fun for me, but very stressful for a lot of people. But we made sure that they are very well prepared. The preparation with the audit was done with BSI, and they were evaluating our readiness to to be able to conduct the audit. So we had to provide samples and clause for each clause of the standard as a lead appointed party to audit. And with the size of the projects that we have ongoing with BIM, we had to provide 5 different projects. And 3 of them had to be in different phase of progress, and then 2 of them had to be completed. So we submitted a student resident project where is a design and build project, and is completed at 50%. Light rail network design and build, again 75% completion. A hospital construction management 90%, and then airport 100%, and a senior care center design build 100%. So we provided all the documentation, and it went very well. We got the certification. So very happy this year. Very happy that we have a great team who support us. Most of my team is here today. I thank you. So what's next for Pomelo is that we want to be able to make sure that the alignment of technologies in place, and then also future technologies will be aligned. And then second, we want to make sure that there is a rigor. We will have dedicated internal team to conduct internal audits for our BIM projects. And then we want to be able to apply the standard processes and documents to all of our BIM projects, not only on the ones that require ISO 19650, but for most of our projects to make sure that the quality of information is at a standard that we want, so that we can leverage the power of information management and integrate it in our business level processes and systems. That's it for me. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Lieu. Merci, Lieu. Just a quick note, that's British Standards Institute, not BSI. buildingSMART International doesn't do ISO 19650 certification unless maybe Richard Kelly would have made that jump. And also British Standards Institute certifying companies in Canada. It's maybe heritage, colonial heritage there. Our next presenter, notre prochain présentateur, c'est
our next presenter
France.
Is from France. It's the director or the chair of buildings in France. So Mr. Frank Hovorka. Merci.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Je vous propose une expérience.
I will propose right now an experience. I will try to do this presentation in French and not to use a single word of English. And every time I put a word in English, you count a point off. And at the end, how many times will I have said an English word? You can tell me, point it out. I think it's a very interesting exercise to do it here in Montreal. It actually gives me a lot of pleasure to do this. Okay, so the presentation is in English, so that way it'll be easier to follow. I have not done like the woman before me who has translated her entire presentation for the PowerPoint sake. I will speak to you of work that is issued from the international standard ISO 14000, which is a European standard. I will show you an excerpt. And here is the analyzation of a life cycle of the non-building products. We're talking about products per se. As you know, for myself, 95% of the components in a building are that issued from the industry. Nothing is really built on site anymore. So the work that has led by experts on the analysis of the life cycle consisted on reflecting to the integration of these products and these components that come from factories of subsystems within the building to finalize the building. The objective is to have each of these products to have a full life cycle from the fabrication point, the transportation of these products towards the construction site, the life cycle during the utilization phase, and the integration process, which will then be immediately transitioned to the life cycle of that actual product before it needs to be replaced, and then the end of the life cycle. So we use this algorithm, if you will, to better understand emissions or greenhouse emissions. So we have on the slide right now, you see the lots from A to, I think that says C4, which is the level of carbon created in a construction project. In B6 and B7, you can see here it's the utilization or the use of this product within the building's capacity, which is quite low. And today is, of course, is being pointed out by entire teams, especially with regards to the energetical or the electricity efficiency when we talk about smart cities. So let's look a little bit more deeply with regards to carbon emissions. When we talk about carbon emissions, there are two sources. There's carbon. I showed you earlier B5 and B6, which correspond to the energy used to make the building operate. And then we have to add the electricity used for all the equipments used in the building, which account for enormous amounts of consumption. And then you have the embodied carbon. So the lifestyle analysis also gives us a visual and physical comprehension of greenhouse gases, and from there, based off these analysis, take information to draft declarations on how much greenhouse gas a building is producing and will produce. And eventually we'll be able to create the distinctions between the imported products and the products fabricated or built locally. Why? Because the certain accords that Paris has are based entirely on greenhouse gases on a local standpoint, and consequently they become indispensable or uncircumventable with regards to the Paris Accords. It becomes necessary to know the carbon point for local products, because the imported products has a longer and larger carbon footprint when we import from different countries. There are three metrics here that are very often confounded because they are expressed in kilogram equivalent to carbon per square meter per person. We did three works with the industries. Le BCSD, which is the organization that are primary in the world, to see when and how we need these informations. Or you will find one of these reports that has been drafted about a year ago. The idea is to work on the analysis of the life cycle and the weight that it represents in regards to investments and in ratio to the exploitation costs. Now, as it stands, I am moving from the analysis of this life cycle to the carbon emissions to the total life cycle of a building. And all of a sudden, my analyses will allow me to calculate the exact cost from the conceptualization to the end of its lifestyle. So in ISO 14000, we take approximately a life cycle about 14 years. And obviously, every building has a different lifestyle. And what we came to know is that's quite extraordinary is that there's no building contract or never do we mention the life cycle of a building. But on our end, we think it's key in the analysis of the life cycles, because you will see in my next demonstrations is that a product, for example, that has a low life cycle tendency and has a high carbon footprint that needs to be replaced 5 years, contrary to a product that could last 20, 25 years. So the work on this carbon footprint is extremely important, because we must foster from the origin of the conceptualization of the work, the life cycle, the performance, and from there we can have added financial value with regards to choice of products that are more performant on a longer period of time, which is something that's not being done immediately when we approach building or constructing a building from the classic point of view. So there are 2 regulations that have been implemented. The first is the directive, what we'll call eco-designing, which is quite easy. In this concept or this theme called eco-design, each point must be attached with pertinent information. Each product, I'm talking about effectively all the products of construction and the techniques and for ventilation, etc. I'm talking about all access. So this is quite a revolution for the industries in Europe. I cannot hide the fact that they were quite positive to these new directives, because it was quite necessary to be transparent on the actual manufacturing processes of the products and the life cycle possible of these products, and to have estimated outputs of greenhouse gases regarding the conceptualization and manufacturing of these products. So within all this scope, we have now the National Declaration of Product Manufacturing, which is now becoming a standard, and that when there are products being manufactured, there now has to be an included component for life cycle and carbon emissions or carbon footprint from the creation of those products. So this is quite interesting when we think about it, that if we speak of this first direction, which I've just mentioned, and the second direction, which now requires these forms to be filled out, and the second directions aren't always quite coordinated. There are 2 databases that are quite different. And obviously, nobody really questioned themselves on the standardization for the product bases, and we find ourselves with products that are often these sheets are in PDF, which are completely inexploitable for machine-to-machine speaking, or an LCD type machine which doesn't have the necessary components or artificial intelligence to read these kinds of documents. The idea is that we want to standardize this approach so that machine can learn from forms that are quite standardized and legible for the analysis of automation. Now, obviously, what we're trying to achieve here is interoperability, because it's crucial to have the information to be communicated based on various databases. So obviously, in France, we have done differently, again, because that's just how we do things. We do things differently. So in France, we use XSD formats. Of course, it's just more complicated. So the industry or the producer that needs to create these databases, these information sheets, they have to produce 2 different sheets based on different information, based on the European standards, and that comes from their own country. I hope that you yourself, Canada, will impose your own format. It'll only make one more. The point is that that's all sarcasm, by the way, for those listening in English. It's that what we want here is to, within the regulations, and some of you were there for the first situation, the inauguration. France is first in line, of a leader in the world to have implemented a requirements for every single one of the building standards have a analysis of the life cycle with a limit on carbon footprint or carbon emissions during construction phases. So I wish you great help. I wish you great courage to try to learn how to calculate it. The point is that now we have a crossroads where we now not only have to work on the global cost, where we hope that we will be able to translate carbon into euros or monies, and at this point we are able now to use these formats with other programs that don't speak to each other. That's a major point that we're working on. The other thing is that we need to work on the energy consumption of the building. From this point, what I'm saying is that we use the ISO 52000 that I'm inviting you to look into. It's an extremely important documentation that speaks of passing from the product to the system. And from that, I mean a normalized system, whether it be the works that were conducted. And the directive within eco-design is that we're not just giving a certificate on the performance of a product, but we're now going to give a certificate of performance on a component within a system. And if we're talking about, for example, heating and ventilation, if you take a treatment or air treatment or filter system, it's not just an intrinsic type of performance. No, now it's it's associated to a degeneration process from cold and hot and through a life cycle. It's entirely more complex. It's based on much more dynamic calculations that brings about a higher level of complexity of management. And obviously, when you need to combine that with an information or a software that needs to read and understand that kind of information, well, obviously it adds incredible levels of complexity. And on top of that, all of these databases need to speak with other very complex databases. And until now, we would have absolutely needed some kind of software to work in a fluid manner, because once again, the objective is that we're trying to we're trying to create the bridges necessary for these systems to communicate. So we find ourselves with enormous amounts of databases, and after that, a lot of requirements for informations on the transaction, the management, the responsibilization, the reporting on greenhouse gases, which is now mandatory in Europe. And so what we said to ourselves is that we'll use the environmental certifications to help us create a standard. Nope, that's not going to happen, because the environmental certifications are that are by averages and not performance based, and each certification has a different yielding based on various indicators. For example, the various level so the various system based on what the requirements have different weights and will measure things differently according to weight. Now, all these elements put together, when we look at France and its carbon emissions and carbon footprint, if we look at it from a life cycle point of view, we're thinking, and every time you use something or you replace a piece, you arrive at the carbon point after 50 years, and we can express how much carbon will be delivered or created from this. So it's quite interesting when we look at it from the construction point of view. We're not allowed 900 kilograms anymore. We're not allowed to go over 760 kilograms now. So we're already creating limitations on performances for construction. And this is something that I was very pleased to participate in. But if we were to implement or put in place a building passport with its entirety, with the entire life cycle on a 50-year period, and each year you could see what has been actually consumed by carbon, by the products of construction or the materials of construction, and then the electricity and etc., all the daily consumptions, which would allow then to have a comparable for interior quality when we speak of one building next to another, or to compare them just because of the based on the volume that you're going to emit, and you will to a certain extent be able to you'll be able, in fact, with these kind of statistics, to compare a comfortable building to a much more comfortable building. So with this, we're able now to measure carbon emissions or carbon consumption, and with these other forms, we can now work on the reutilization or recycling. We have also a capacity to verify uncertainties or anomalies, and with these types of ideas or forms, we can have a unified document for all buildings that allows us to provide specific information from each building. Now that this has all been said, we can obviously see that the progress of information since the industrial components and their integration in a building and the life cycle of those components, how this building reacts to the climate, how will it react to use or to wear and tear, how much will it keep to maintain, etc., etc., etc. And from there, we find ourselves once again having to address colossal amounts of data with a dynamic vision, which is practically impossible to just take a picture and say, that's it, I'm done. You know, I'm done my lifestyle exercise. No, these things are always moving. It's forever evolving. So we have to manage in a permanent manner the information based on various moments of the year, and obviously there will be an evolution through years because of climate change, etc. So once again, we need to be able to acquire and collect this data on the performance of the products that you have used in various databases, completely fragmented. Now, so one of the works that we really reflected on for buildingSMART is we asked ourselves, how can we really start from the heart of the databases and attach to that databases that are part of other databases that are non-operable and non-structured, but we have to nonetheless kind of hook it on and off and attach it to other components. So the idea is to be able, and you'll be able to, of course, if you're interested in this, to the development, is to give a tool that will allow to do this work, this interconnectivity work with databases, because we will not in a building database carry all of the information that are completely spread out at the industrial level in and managers and etc. So the issue at this point is that, quite interesting I must say, is that do we try and assume to collect all the databases, or do we try to just accept the fact that we are not going to be so interconnected, and how of course can we secure or bring a safety net to these exchanges of databases? This is where we stand. Obviously we're reflecting on the databases that should be common so that we can report then the control and command and sensors and the management of assets to do simulations. All this, you know this quite more than me. And the final idea is to have sustainable data analytics, which are structured so we can offer them to the banks and the investors who ask us more and more to demonstrate the level of performance of our buildings. There used to be a day, blessed from the gods, where all we had to say was, my building is green because I've put a vegan shop there and a little bit of a bike stand there. No, it's not like that anymore. So we have to structure the information that it be not questionable, and that it be legitimate, transparent, and truthful. So once again, to conclude, I think that we've really we do have some work to do together on the transparency of this information, how we foster it, and how how we can do it for viable investors, and how to present it all. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, merci beaucoup.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. Thank you, Frank. Today I encourage Canada to not create a new norm. I engage myself personally to not create new green norms. Our next panelist will speak about the relationship between clients and architects in terms of the exchange of data. It's a case study that is very real. Mr. Frenette, who is BIM director, and here, Mr. from CISS Montérégie. Our presentation will be in French, so make sure that you have your headsets. We know that we will lose some time, so please come at the end of the representation. Come and say hello. Pierre-Olivier and moi, I'm really happy. This duality between, we are very happy to be able to share our, this culture is this very big project. Now, before I go any further, we will lack time, so we will try to do this as fast as possible. A few words on us. Sebastien Frenette, who is BIM director at Provence-Chez-Roy Engineers. It's an engineer architect firm that is multidisciplinary. In terms of this project, we were head of the engineering team, and in Études, Pierre-Olivier, I am consultant for infrastructures. I am the client that will take possession of the building following its construction. A few words, a few introductory words. The project that we are talking to you about is a new hospital in Vaudreuil-Soulanges, a project $2.6 million project, 200 people that are involved. It's a strategic data because we're talking about collaborative work and of sharing of information. So it is a very complex project, and this is what we're trying to present to you today. The conception team is the head team in order to produce technical files and also determine the next phases. They will do construction, financing, and conception. Obviously, in the conception team, the primary role is to do preliminary studies, preliminary observations. We have our data. We also have our models. We need to handle 6,700 pieces and 1,500 tools. Now, we had much more today, but we will focus on one particular aspect so that we don't exceed the 20 minutes. We will do that in order to be able to give contractual forms to our contractors, and also so that we can integrate it in our BIM to ensure the project. We've done many complex things, but today we want to concentrate on the conceptual teams was using DROFIS. We've worked with different data banks, and we've worked together on a daily level. To get there, I just want to tell you that we have gone through a series of meetings, and it happened because of the trust and the collaboration that we worked with. There are many workshops. It wasn't always easy, but we ended up understanding each other and proceeding with the project. As Sebastien was saying, it wasn't always easy. A lot of discussions at the beginning and a lot of issues, especially with the fact that we had two different databases. It was a new phenomenon. In order to get there, the conceptual team, the head team, and the client team, we sat together in order to define our orientations. So the two first orientations, the first one is principally on following the data and to have access and to update the information as much as possible in real time. Obviously, on the client side, we wanted to get into the project and started, and we wanted to share the proper information. So it gave us a third orientation. So we had to direct the project for a better management of the information. So the technological challenges were, on the client side, historically we used BXL. I don't know if you already did projects with 100,000 Excel lines and having to find technical files. It's not easy. So for this project, which implicated more than 200 people, we had to structure ourselves and find a common platform, a dogmatic platform where we establish all the information. On the conceptive side, on the constructive side, we had to pass from paper, a culture. We had to transfer from paper to a file culture, a numerical file. So we had to, with our engineers, we had to pass from paper and go towards the numerical. So we had to meet a lot in order to make this flow happen. The challenges, we have classical challenges. a difficulty following the program, a difficulty following the evolution also, or the progresses medically. We needed to share this information in a recurring manner, and it was a stressful fact. One of the challenges we had, it was the time, the delay time that everyone had to use when it came to the construction team, the engineering team, and the modelization team. Timing had to be respected. We wanted to accelerate the communication in between us in order to avoid our mistakes. On the client side, the challenges aren't so different. It has to do with a follow-up. The follow-up has to be done from the beginning to the end of the project when it comes to the materials. On the construction phase, we have lists. We have to follow this information, but we as well have to follow the budget. We need to answer to our ministry. We have to follow the budget and follow the requirements. When it comes to the project, the ecosystem is important, the platform choice. We were in opposition at first. We tried to impose our own platforms at first, but we understood very quickly that we had to go from I to we, and talk, speak, share in order to establish a common language and common processes. So 2 keywords: cooperation and trust. That was at the heart of our conversations. Pierre-Olivier and moi noticed that we wanted to impose our platform more, and then we realized that it was better to build bridges between our 2 platforms, and this is what we want to explain to you today. As I mentioned to you, the client had their platform, which is dogmatic, which is completely independent. So their team was working on dogmatic, the conception team were working on DROFIS, and then we were sharing the information. Now, in order to build this bridge between DROFIS and dogmatic, as engineers, we have built pillars, and those 3 pillars would define, structure, and harmonize the data that we had. The first pillar is the definement of roles and responsibilities. We used the RACI system. Who is accountable, who answers, who produces, who's responsible, who's accountable, who has the control on the information, and who gets the information. Who takes care of what? Once we were able to establish this, the level of trust augmented and the stress decreased. We formalized this. We knew that the conception team would handle the tools, that they would do the follow-up, that they would look at our equipment, see the usage of our equipment, and also the modelization. On the client side, we are responsible of the equipment team, so we have a dedicated team. Our responsibility is to establish the library, the equipment library necessary for us to conceive. Obviously, we did this in collaboration with the conceptual team. Everything that has to do with the distribution of equipment, and talking about medical, right? Medical equipment had to be well distributed. Well, the second pillar that we brought forward is that we structured our needs, our data needs. We all have needs depending on our discipline. Pierre-Olivier said that we went from I to we. In this pillar, we went back to I. I need this information in order to do this work, and this cannot be denied. You need this fuel in order to progress in your project. When it comes to the conceptual team, we need prerequisites on the equipment, the parameters, the weight, and so on. We also need a distribution by pieces. Where are the components going to be? And the story of modification, the history of modification, which has to be done. We didn't want any material equipment to disappear. This is why they had to be listed. On our end, we want to be able to work and distribute our equipment. We want to be able to provide missing pieces. We needed this history. We want to know in the evolution of our program which are the different pieces that we're going to need and how they evolve themselves day to day. We want to see also how we can mix pieces together and so on. With these two needs, it brought us to a transaction of data. In order to transfer this data, we need to harmonize the platforms. And in order to get to this transaction, you need to build collaboration, you need to build trust, but you should also coordinate your requirements. So we coordinated 100 parameters, and these parameters, do not forget that it's not just about a dimension parameters, it's also the data that comes behind it. Are these data numericals? Are these texts? All of that has to be coordinated in a file, and now I think we're about 5 or 6 version of it, and it brought us to be able to share the information, the data. Oh, we gave you our punch, but it was voluntary. We just wanted to be able to work in our environment. What we want to share with you is that at the beginning we were convinced that the only way to succeed was to use our own platform. And at the end, we, through the process, we noticed that we can actually build bridges, and we inspired ourselves from different principles, certain principles of the openBIM. So it's a very flexible system. It's also a very good system in terms of the workflow and a sharing of data. And the keyword today is operability. Now, information exchange process, we talk about collaboration, trust, but also throughout the project, you have to build the trust and you have to maintain it. In order to maintain this trust, this collaboration, we had to define a group of processes as a team so that we could define well what we had to do. Obviously, it wasn't made in one meeting. We had to have multiple meetings, but at the end we came out with something that was very valuable. Certain processes are more critical. Example, the numbers of exchange. It is a schedule that is a very tight schedule, lots of exchange of data, so you have to be able to work in real time. It's a process that needed at least once a week, and sometimes it needed more fine-tuning, twice a week sometimes. Now, the two teams acquired quality control during their exchanges. Now, the usage of this data, for the client, the usage of data, I'm just going to go back a little bit. It's dogmatic. It's our base. So we create a list of the requirements with technical files that are distributed in each piece. So each piece comes from the head team. All of this data are in different dimensions. I will let Sebastien talk to you about that. Yeah, that's where the magic starts. Once that we've established the frequency of information, then we can recuperate the information. And it's very small, it's voluntary. We won't put a hard emphasis on it, but I'll give you a better example. We talk about the dimension, the real-time dimension. We've reused that, and the conceptual team used it again in a known environment in which they are comfortable and in which they were trained. We pushed this information in our modelization tool, and we made a generical family that was well enough, that represented, that had total dimensions that we needed. It enabled us to ensure a proper distribution of the tools. And I told you that at the beginning of the team, when I told you that the gap between those two programmation teams and modelization teams is exactly where our initiative took a lot of meaning. It made things faster. Elements were added, taken out, dimensions were modified. And that's exactly when we have this information, when the information is centralized and not dispersed, that we are able to produce well. We know the story. When someone's gone, someone cannot put an input, we are not sure of anything. So one of the important things to attach to our tool is that we were able to do a quality control in its whole, and we're able to do that, and that helped us avoid a lot of mistakes, because every single mistake was extremely important. Another example I want to show you in the using of this data, an information that's very important is the parameters of incidence. It has to do with costs, production. I'll give you an example of IRM. It's big, it's expensive, and it's very complex. So it allowed us to isolate very quickly these this kind of equipment. When it comes to the incidence phase, in terms of engineering, they isolated the critical equipment in order to identify which ones were the heaviest so they can calculate the weight using. We were able to use this data at different levels with different options as well. Another side is we find the engineering in the electromechanics. They took the distribution, the distributions of the equipment. They were able to see how long it was going to take, what it would take to operate it, and that would ensure them that they were able to calculate costs and time. So, for example, we will be able to analyze whether or not we put the fire down with water or anything else. We were able to make these engineering choices very quickly. There are other examples that I want to give you, but there are about 2 minutes, so we want to pass to lesson learned. The lessons learned, we have a few that we want to share with you. The first, we learned it in a hard way. We had to respect the technical choices. It was a very big lesson learned at first because we wanted to impose our platform. It didn't even take a week. It took a few weeks. It took a couple of months until we said, okay, it doesn't work. We really need to collaborate differently. When that happens, you have to make sure that the platform is up to par. Because you cannot connect two things that don't connect. So the prerequisites were done and have to be done. The second thing is that the data has to be exploitable, understandable. You have to understand the parameters. Yes, no, this language permitted us to understand each other. For example, when it comes to units, there are not one vendor constructor that uses the same basis. So we had to establish a common language in order to understand each other throughout the project. And that very enterprise helped us go very far. Another element we want to highlight is something that helps us to consolidate taking efficient decisions, making efficient decisions. So we got together, everybody had their version of Excel, everybody had the same Excel, but one had V1, V2, V3, V9, no it's me, no it's you. It allowed us through the platform to be able to either augment the frequency of data sharing or the conversation we needed to have, and to identify the responsibilities. So at least we knew who had which information, what did they control, and we could see how we could share. So I have less than a minute. I will accelerate. We kept things simple. It was voluntary. The 200 people that we implicated did not come as a group. We gradually integrated people in our team. So we had to maintain our platform during the process, and we had to ensure a good training of the people involved. Another element that I want to come back to, we understood that we had to that it would only work if we put the human being at the center of our operations. It will not work if we do not care for each other and speak to each other. 10 seconds. We went a long way, like Sebastien says. It's been very hard at first, a lot of you know, not selfishness, but not far from selfishness. But with the goodwill that we had, the good intentions that we had, we were able to get this information, to cross this information, to share it together. We want to know in the future, how will that be useful? Our objective is to continue to maintain this information, to keep it live with our contractors, with our conception team, with our head team. We want to so that we are able to manage our assets with BIM. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm going to invite you to take a seat. And as well as for the others, we have 10 minutes for a panel.
you know, do we impose platforms or do we impose harmonize our data? And this was a clear sort of success story around understanding and harmonizing around data. Instead of, you know, using your own platforms, your own tools, but not imposing those. All right, so I'm going to start with Claudia and Victor. And my first question is around, we talked a lot about different types of standards, and I'd like to see, so you guys used 9650 to articulate the projects, but how has standards and sort of international standards and perhaps 9650 and openBIM standards informed practice within your organization? Has it, and is it in the process of, and what are maybe the challenges with that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, part of the presentation was us, you know, looking and reflecting on our existing projects and comparing it to the framework. I think that's you know, something that we're working on. It's a way that kind of standardized framework would allow us to get a bit more consistency. One of the challenges is that, you know, we can do that at our firm, and, you know, but it does require, you know, kind of, again, collaboration, cooperation from everyone, you know. So there was one project we were looking to implement level of information need, but, you know, there was hesitation because, you know, some of the collaborating partners weren't familiar with it yet. And you know, that kind of halts, you know, the full implementation of standards. So I think there's just more education that needs to happen. Again, you know, you can't really implement a framework like ISO in isolation. It has to happen from all parties on the project.
Correct. Yeah. So and it's mostly when it gets into getting all of our partners. It's making sure, as Claudia mentioned, it's just not one size fits all, and we got to make sure that we develop the framework, we can use the framework, make sure we're going to have like try and errors, make sure understanding, especially in Canada, ISO 19650 is quite new, and we're still like trying to learn how that correlates to our current structure and making the adjustments required to just fulfill that framework and make sure that we can work around. There are a lot of things that we need to work, not only on like architectural side of things, like contracts and like the overall construction process that has like some tweaks required, but I think we're in a good like first steps on making that work within the Canadian environment.
It's interesting, yeah. So there's a lot of legacy practices that we've sort of worked on and you know, did a lot of significant work within these large firms to harmonize and standardize, and here's a new framework and trying to fit that. You guys have gone through that. Your Pomelo has gone through that with the certification. Can you speak to sort of the, you know, maybe one or two internal challenges, especially getting people on board with that behind that process, behind that retransformation process, if you want to call it that?
First of all, it's about how and what it is, because ISO, we have ISO 9000.
9001, yeah.
9001. And then other ISO on the go. So for us, it's normal to have a well-managed company, but it's basically what it is and what we need to do to get to that level. And then also, well, what we need to do is, for those who understood what it is, and then what is it and why do we do it? That's another question. We're always the ones who will have to convince some of our team members, and then they have different level of maturity. I'm sure it's in every company. So you have allies, and then you also have people very open to learn and to know what it is. And what was very important is that why is it beneficial for us? And it's basically the quality of information that we can get out of it, and then to integrate it with our systems.
So you're seeing the clear value proposition of standardizing, and especially across a company that spans the entire country, needing to repeatable process. I want to go to Sebastien. Je vais aller vers Sebastien puis Pierre-Olivier. Est-ce que dans votre... j'ai compris qu'il y a eu des...
I know that there were certain tensions. We were talking and discussing around the platform. It was necessary. We were discussing about which platform to use, and then they said, no, we need to focus on the data. Did you have access to current norms in order to help you with this harmonization of data, or did you have to redo your work completely? Like, how did it work for you? Good question, very good question. With the level of maturity that we had, we inspired ourselves. Well, we were starting from scratch, so we really had to establish a common language. We knew that we were working in the future together, and so we knew that it was time to establish a dictionary, a lingo. We focused on our data in order to attain our objectives, and this is what we're going to do in the future. We're going to keep doing that. So as a client, Pierre-Olivier, what did you learn knowing that this project is going to be happening, this project is going to be alive for a few years? What will you apply in the next phases or in the next projects? Data is extremely important in the type of project we have. To centralize the data is extremely important. It helps the team operate. It gives us a better concept in the end. We forget less things in our pieces, in our components. There are no mistakes, no mistake in our exchanges. We can only be winner, and when it comes to the tenders offered, we can only be a winner. So did it help you internally? Yes, it did. Yes, it did. It helped us in our internal structure. It did because Dogmatic, many people work on Dogmatic at the same time, so the data is always updated in our files and for our users. So everybody also is aware of the updating, so we ensure ourselves of a harmonization and a uniformity. At the end, with the elements that we have to manage in the list, we ensure that what we will transmit or what we will block with the ministry or our contractors, we make sure that all of that will be updated according to the budgets. So we talked about the value in terms of modelization, standardization. Now, you have to push the standardization. So when it comes to France, the return of France on it was actually very, very interesting. Is it possible for you to talk about the impact on this regulation and tell us how it really pushed the industry to structure itself? What did it do for the industry? It was an incredible shock because we went from a system where tests had been made 5 or 6 years prior on the life cycle and the carbon footprint. We had about 5,000 to 6,000 operations. Now we're passing to a massification, and we have to multiply by 100 the operations that we will conduct, but also there will be information coming from these projects. So it will be massive data. So you cannot enter data Excel sheets. Impossible. The information is too large. If you look at an environmental spreadsheet and you look at the French database, it's about 4 to 6 online. It's not always structured in the same way. It's you actually have to go in a world where you are functioning from machine to machine, and you have to analyze the life cycle, where the challenge that we have when we talk about life cycle analysis is that we are able to speak to an investor on the total cost, the total usage cost. So it actually impacts the value of the good, because we didn't know how to show that before. But now, because we have this structured information that is in a system, in a normative system that is very complex, but we actually know how to handle it. We know the complexity of it because of the tools that are in it, the structuring tools with the openBIM, the openDSDD, and the tool that I spoke to you about, the multiforming. It permits us to interconnect the bases. So it's possible because we have this data environment, and very quickly we are able to structure, translate, and transmit 2 important words: interoperability and reversibility. it's very nice to be interoperable, but the information that comes into your system has to be able to get out without having lost any of its accuracy. So we talk about reversibility. It's important to keep, in order to keep the confidence between collaborators. And in France, we have a big challenge. We have to build in a complex manner our tool, and we have to work together, because if you invite me back, I will come in a couple of years to tell you whether it worked or not. In either way, the invitation is already there. So it's the end of the session. C'est la fin de la session.
So we'll take a 30-minute break and for the final session, which is a discussion and rapid-fire presentations on what's next for Canada. Thank you.